This is the National Broadcasting Company.
Hey everyone, I'm Simone, and here are some of today's headlines, briefly. The number of mass shootings we've seen in just the last few months is staggering, and sadly today, we've got to tell you about another one in Thousand Oaks, California. Here's what we know about this one. It happened late Wednesday night at a crowded bar filled with college students. A veteran Marine armed with a .45 caliber handgun opened fire before turning the gun on himself. The 28-year-old suspect, identified as Ian David Long, killed at least 12 people, including a sheriff's deputy. So many more are injured, and while investigators are trying to figure out a motive here, witnesses are completely broken, as you can imagine.
We just tried to get out, get behind a car, get behind something, and then
Yeah, we just tried to take cover.
Pretty sure I saw him, and I'll never get that picture out of my head, but we dropped and we heard the gunshots. A lot of gunshots.
You just hear these loud pops, pop, pop, pop. I was freaking out, my hands started curling in, like I was breathing heavy, I just didn't know what to do.
President Trump offered his condolences, saying, "Great bravery shown by police," and he also added, "God bless all the victims and families of the victims." So here we are again, the all too familiar reality of mourning yet another mass shooting. The Pittsburgh synagogue attack, where 11 people were killed, was less than 2 weeks ago. And according to the Gun Violence Archive, there have been a dozen mass shootings since then. Now, to be clear, not all of these resulted in deaths. Just want to note, this is the 307th mass shooting in the U.S. this year. All right, switching gears now, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is in the hospital recovering. She took a bad fall in her office and fractured several of her ribs last night. Now, the Supreme Court tells us she's in for observation and treatment at the hospital. Of course, Ginsburg's been on the court since she was nominated by President Clinton in '93. She suffered from broken ribs before, actually, and recovered fully in both cases. Now, by the way, the 85-year-old's workout routine is also no joke. She lifts, bro. Now, the injury did prevent her from attending an initiation ceremony for her new colleague, Justice Brett Kavanaugh. All right, after a lot of speculation, Tesla now knows who's going to replace their leader, at least on the board. So Robin Denholm is taking over for Elon Musk as board chair. She's currently a CFO at an Australian telecoms operator, and she was already a member of the board of directors. Now, Musk had to step down as part of that whole settlement with the SEC, and both Tesla and Musk had to pay a $20 million civil penalty. But Musk isn't going away by any means, guys. He's still chief executive, and the market seems to be reacting well to the news. Tesla shares were up following the announcement. All right, guys, you might have thought the midterms are over. Surprise! Votes are still being counted in some really tight races, like down in Georgia. Republican Brian Kemp is claiming he's the new governor there, but Democrat Stacey Abrams says she'll fight until every vote is counted. Now, her campaign is suing at least one county where they believe votes are impacted by damage from Hurricane Michael. Kemp's team says Abrams is just trying to steal the election. And then there could be a recount in Florida. At least that's what Democratic candidate Andrew Gillum is suggesting.
I want you to know that in spite of the fact that we're a little bit down in the numbers, we're hopeful that every single vote will be counted in this race.
So Gillum conceded to Republican Ron DeSantis Tuesday night, but the numbers are still so very close. At last check, Gillum is only 43,000 votes behind DeSantis, and ballots are still coming in, but any recount will have to wait until Saturday. That's the deadline for all the districts to report in. All right, get it together, Florida. The nation is watching. I can say that because I grew up there. And those are your headlines, briefly. People of color scored historic wins for Democrats this week. It's the party that consistently earns the black vote, and that's usually where the conversation ends, right? You're black, you vote blue. But we took it a step further. I hung out in D.C. with two groups of black conservatives who look at the same country and see completely different narratives. Traitors. That's what their haters call them. So they retreat here. A secret group chat with other supposed sellouts. But they didn't commit a crime. They're just black Trump supporters. And this is their coming out party.
I'm gathering this is kind of a judgment-free zone. Everyone can kind of just be themselves. And
I think it confuses some people. They see black people walking around with MAGA hats, and they're probably like, do they like know what they're in line for?
Kalasia, Charisse, and Anthony bonded on social media. They're here in DC to finally meet others like them in person. As a biracial woman, I know exactly what it feels like to be misunderstood by your own people. So that's why I came here, to find out why everyone acts like black conservatives don't exist.
USA! USA! USA!
This is the nonprofit behind this meetup, Turning Point USA. They promote conservative values on college campuses. And you might know it because of them, Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens.
There is nothing more American than being black in this country.
But today, the crowd is here to see someone else.
Who in this room wants to be president someday?
President Trump's approval rating among African Americans hovers around 14%. In here, though, it's off the charts.
The African American unemployment rate has hit the lowest level ever recorded in the history of our country.
This is a recurring theme.
African American unemployment has reached its lowest rate ever recorded.
Trump deserves credit for his role in maintaining low black unemployment levels. It's been steadily declining since before he got to Washington. But beyond that, the picture looks a little different. The median net worth of black families is 10 times lower than white families. The gap between black and white home ownership is growing, and black college graduates still make significantly less than white college graduates. But for these students, this is bigger than just the economy.
Before even becoming a conservative, I started to feel like I was a victim. But once I got out of that victim mentality, I actually started thriving.
My biggest pet peeve is when people say, we've made no progress since slavery. Are you kidding me?
a lot of what I heard today was the narrative that Democrats really don't care about black people.
We sit in these really bad, dilapidated, broken communities. Democrat policies have continuously been implemented, and they have not worked.
Welfare reform is on the president's to-do list. And this gets to the core of conservatism, that liberal policies unintentionally do more harm than good. After LBJ created social programs like food stamps and Medicare in the 60s, the rate of black economic progress actually slowed down. They made progress, but not as quickly as in the 5 years before these programs started. Still, there are far fewer black people in poverty today than there were back then. But even if conservatives are right about welfare holding folks back, sometimes Trump makes things complicated.
After Charlottesville, when he said there were fine people on both sides, do you think that was racist?
No one likes to see Nazis parading around, singing blood and soil. That could have been handled a lot better.
Trump sometimes says things in the wrong way. I never feel like he's personally attacking the black community.
Not all black conservatives agree. We met up with Cordricos Driscoll. He's a Republican who teaches religion and politics at GW.
Do you think it's fair to call Trump a racist?
I think it's fair to call Trump racist. Yes. How I define racism is about power structures that prevent access to certain things. And so when we look at his policies and when we certainly look at his rhetoric, it falls in line to what racism is.
Why do you think we see such vitriol coming from other members of the black community directed at people within this young black conservative movement?
That is one thing I never agreed with. Black conservatives aren't going away.
He's right. This isn't some new trend. Then why are there so many culturally conservative African Americans who don't vote Republican? Well, it goes back to the end of slavery, when black people did vote red. But just as they became Republican leaders in the 1930s, Hoover's administration kicked them out to appeal to Southern racists. It's when Roosevelt's New Deal came along that minorities saw a chance to turn their misfortunes around. And when Republican presidential nominee Barry Goldwater opposed the Civil Rights Act, that's when many black voters switched to loyal Democrats.
Being a black conservative, you kind of feel like you're the only one.
People have been really crazy, especially black people. I had some people tell me to bleach my skin, kill myself, you're a coon, you're Uncle Tom.
It's like one thing to be called those things by like white people. When it's within your own community, it hurts.
And then there's Kanye.
You didn't think we'd forget about him, did you? Before his fallout with Candace Owens, people here appreciated the visibility he lent to the cause and the MAGA hat.
This is our president!
I noticed on your Twitter you had that post about wearing your MAGA hat for the first time.
Yes, which was yesterday. It's giving me courage to stand up for what I believe in.
Here's the thing about the hat. When these guys wear it, it's an act of defiance that says we're not Democrats and we are not invisible. Look, people are messy, too messy for the simple little boxes society wants to put us in. And if someone doesn't fit, it's becoming much easier to dismiss the unknown rather than try to understand it.
America!
All right, the Trump administration is tightening asylum rules as the Caravan approaches the U.S. Now, the new rules would deny asylum to migrants who enter the country illegally. So this plan is supposed to go into full effect in the coming days as thousands of migrants have now reached Mexico City. They're camping out in a stadium, and there are more on the way. NBC News producer Annie Rose Ramos has been following this since the beginning and is at the stadium right now. Hey, Annie Rose.
Hey, Simone. So we're here in Mexico City. Authorities say that as many as 5,000 people are already here. They're expecting thousands more in the next couple of days. And we're actually outside of the stadium because the stadium is now completely full. They can't build tents fast enough. So what I want to show you here is people have been setting up with their tents outside in the parking lot. And so they're just trying to find any empty spots that they can for themselves and their families to camp out in the next couple of days. This is such a crucial stop for migrants from the Migrant Caravan here in Mexico City. They're getting, you see here, there's donated clothing and some shoes and hats for the migrants in case they need. And they're getting some hot meals. They're getting much needed medical attention. Here you see an ambulance taking people to a nearby hospital.
So,
they're
Annie
also
Rose,
getting.
I'm curious. I know that there's this huge influx of migrants coming into Mexico City. Mexico City is a huge tourist destination as well. How is the Mexican government handling this situation?
Sure. So the Mexican government has set up what we see here, which is at this stadium, which is medical attention, and also lawyers and volunteers and people from health services to be able to tell them what their options are if they want to stay in Mexico City and seek asylum here, or if they want to continue on to the United States.
So I know that the Mexican government was offering some incentives to migrants to actually stay and settle in Mexico. Have any of the people that you've talked with say that they plan to do just that?
So people are still really in this decision-making process. They're trying to get informed, but the majority of people, mostly here from Central America, set out to reach the United States, and they continue to want to do so. They maintain that in the United States, they'll have more of an opportunity, not just for themselves, but for their children. A lot of people are fleeing gang violence and poverty. They say there are no jobs available for them in Central America. And so they say in the United States, they hope they will have more opportunity to find work and to be able to make a living.
So as these migrants are weighing their options, how are they hearing and just communicating with one another about what lies ahead for them if they decide to keep heading towards the U.S.? I mean, are they aware of the sentiment that's coming from the president that awaits them if they were to keep heading this way?
Yes, Simone, that's a great question. We actually met a few volunteers earlier today who said they're showing photos to the migrants of detention camps, of the detention tent city in Tornillo where they put unaccompanied minors. They're also showing them photos of troops that have been sent by the Trump administration to the U.S. border, mainly because they say nobody would believe it. The migrants have been hearing about all of these stories, have been hearing about the reports that troops have moved to the border because of this migrant caravan headed to the U.S. border. And they say it's so implausible that they just don't understand why. And so volunteers have been showing them photos to just prove that this indeed is happening.
So how are they actually hearing this? Like, are they connected in terms of internet capabilities? Do they have phones? Like, how are they getting the information?
Yeah, it's really just been a spread of mouth. While a lot of them started out with phones, some of them have had to barter their phones in order to get more water or fresh food. And so a lot of them don't have phones. They obviously don't have access to internet here in this camp or television. So this is largely a word of mouth type of thing. But again, people don't really know what to believe. They don't know if it's true, false. One woman I spoke to today said that she's really, really scared that they're going to separate her daughter from her. And so she just doesn't know what awaits her. And many of them don't know what awaits them at the U.S. border, but they continue to insist that that is their ultimate goal.
Annie Rose, thank you so much for bringing us this story. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Simone. Thanks.
The Internet Research Agency is one of the biggest Kremlin-funded groups behind the meddling in 2016. Robert Mueller indicted over a dozen members last year, and another was just indicted last month for interfering in the midterms, but hours before the polls closed Tuesday night. These same trolls released a list of fake Instagram accounts, and from there, it gets really confusing. Ben Collins is here to help me make sense of this story. This is a super confusing story, Ben. So I want to start with this. Who are they trying to trap here this time? Was it media? Was it social media? And did it work?
Sure. They were trying to trap all of us. They really tried to trap the media, and the media did not bite. They had like a 3-week plan where they tried to say that a member of the troll farm was really being effectively kidnapped by the troll farm, which we knew wasn't possible, and trying to defect from Russia. And there was a YouTube video about it that got pulled. It was a long story.
It's over the top.
It's way too much. It was they're just trying too hard. They were just trying too hard this time, right? But on election day, what they did was they put out this website, and they said on the website that Facebook didn't catch us. We have dozens of Instagram accounts that we were using all before midterms, and those Instagram accounts did exist, but they were not that good. They just didn't. They didn't do what they did in 2016 to really affect votes.
So did they actually influence the campaign this year, or they just wanted to make us think that they did?
Right, they wanted to make us think that. And that's what it is with Russian disinformation, and it has been since the dawn of time, right? If they have something, they're really quiet about it. They want to keep it a secret so they can keep using it, and they can keep influencing American media. If they really don't have something, they get really showy, and they try to drum up fear about what they can do in the future. And that's what's happening here.
This is also an example of how these Russian disinformation agents are adapting and changing their tactics, right?
Yeah, exactly. So last time in 2016, they had these really specific accounts that did really, really well. They wound up in the New York Times posing as Americans, and they got people out into physical spaces to protest each other in physical spaces. This time it just didn't happen that way. We saw no evidence of that whatsoever, and because of that, they kind of had. It was election day, and they had nothing to show for it. So they had to go out there and be like, actually, we did all this stuff, instead of actually, showing what they did.
So in terms of how the general public is handling this,
sure.
I know our skepticism is a bit higher now when we're online, right? Mm-hmm. So were users actually interacting with these posts that were coming from these fake Instagram accounts? Were they sharing them? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so people are extremely skeptical of people posing as Americans thank God, by the way, on Twitter and Facebook. The biggest account they had really didn't turn political fast enough. It was called Fit Black Queens, and it was just Instagram models in sports bras. It was not an exciting political event, right?
Right.
That's the sort of thing that worked for them this time. And eventually, what they would do in 2016, they would turn on the political fire hose closer to the election. But that didn't happen. They didn't pull it off in time. They didn't get their tone right in time. And then they were just sort of lost. They just lost this time. It really looks like that.
So what I'm gathering from you, if Russian trolls are saying they're going to influence our election, they're probably not very effective. But if they're not saying anything, they're being very covert, that's when we need to have our guard up. So when we just look at 2016 compared to the 2018 midterm elections, how far have social media companies come? And then how far do you think that we still have to go?
Sure. So they had a great election day, like an A+ banner day that proved that Facebook and Twitter can be websites, yeah, exactly, that are filled with real information that people interact with. That was one day, out of thousands of days.
It's a low bar.
It's a low bar. So hopefully they can keep doing this. They had teams, they had war rooms or whatever, filled with people manning these pages for disinformation accounts. So it's possible. We know it's possible now. Hopefully they can keep doing it. It doesn't, like, it's 2 days later now, and like it doesn't look great. But again, if they remain vigilant with this stuff, like they did on Election Day and the day before Election Day, we can snuff this out. It's possible.
Well, thank you for helping us make sense of all this. As always, Ben Collins, everybody. Appreciate it.
The U.S. hit Russia with more sanctions today, this time on officials and entities supporting Russia's occupation of Crimea and forcible control of eastern Ukraine. So this is on top of new sanctions on Iran from earlier in the week. And Iran isn't having it. They're vowing to break them and say it's not going to work out only through words. But how effective are sanctions anyway? I swung by for this chat with BuzzFeed's Hayes Brown, and he broke it down for us.
So if you were online at all last week, you probably saw this graphic that President Donald Trump tweeted out saying sanctions are coming using a kind of fake Game of Thrones font. You might have wondered, so what are sanctions, which sanctions, and why are they coming? Sanctions are a tool that countries use against other countries to try and change their behavior economically instead of, fighting a war or something. Lately, in the news, you might have heard a lot about sanctions on Iran, which is what President Trump was referring to here. A bunch of sanctions were put back into place on Iran as of Monday that prohibits other countries from buying Iranian oil. If they do, that means that the U.S. will punish them. Let's walk through a couple of scenarios about how sanctions work. Russia was put under U.S. sanction back in 2014 after it invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea. More sanctions were put on Russia after the 2016 election when it was accused of interfering in how the election went down. The sanctions are both for sectors, the defense sector, the energy sector, the mining sector. They're also on individuals, those people who are closest to President Vladimir Putin. When individuals are sanctioned, that could mean a range of things. It could mean that the U.S. seizes their assets that are in U.S. banks. It could mean a travel ban where they are not allowed to come to the U.S. The question is, though, have these sanctions changed Russia's behavior? Experts would say not so much right now. Russia is still in Crimea, and while Russia has said they did not meddle in the 2016 election, that is up in the air whether or not they actually still are trying to interfere in the U.S. election process. Now let's look back to Iran. The unilateral sanctions from the U.S. go all the way back to the Iranian Revolution. Those sanctions are embargo on doing business at all by any American with any Iranian company. Basically, an embargo on the whole country. There are certain ones that are in place only because of Iran's nuclear program. Those are the ones that we're most focused on right now. Some of those sanctions were lifted under the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. In exchange for Iran shutting down most of its nuclear program, they would lift many of the sanctions that were put in place at the United Nations and unilaterally. Since coming into power, President Trump has been extremely committed to undoing the effects of the Iran deal. He pulled out of the deal unilaterally in May, and since then has been slowly rolling the U.S.'s sanctions back into place. The most recent set involved what are called secondary sanctions. If a European business does business with Iran's oil sector, then that company will then fall under U.S. sanctions and be banned from using the U.S. financial sector. And since the dollar is still king in the world, that's a really big deal. So the bigger question now is, are those sanctions going to be effective? Well, one can argue that the previous round of sanctions did have an effect. Iran came to the table, they negotiated, the Iran nuclear deal was worked out, ta-da, sanctions worked. But this new round of sanctions is the U.S. only. It doesn't have the weight of the world behind them. The Trump administration thinks that doesn't really matter, that the U.S. economy is so strong and so connected to the world that Europe and others will bow to the whims of the U.S., and Iran will come back to the table to negotiate a deal. Whether that's actually the case remains to be seen.
So on Tuesday, Washington State voted to stop new taxes on groceries. The ballot initiative was number 1634, and the group supporting it spent millions of dollars on ads urging people to vote yes.
It's unfair to people that have a limited income.
We should not be taxed on what we eat. We need to eat to survive.
Any government to tax its own people on something as essential as food is just wrong.
Feeding these guys is tough enough as it is. I definitely can't afford new taxes on groceries.
They're full of heartwarming stories about working class people struggling to put fruit, meat, and veggies on the table. But here's the thing. That initiative had almost nothing to do with any of that stuff. It was about soda. Okay, let's take a closer look at these ads. Top contributors, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Keurig, Dr. Pepper, Red Bull, the biggest beverage players in the world bankrolled this thing to the tune of over $20 million. The next largest contributor was the Washington Food Industry Association at $20,000. So a difference of a few orders of magnitude here. And that's because it wasn't actually about groceries. It never was. It was about soda and the companies who sell it. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, and Red Bull pumped money into Initiative 1634 to fight off soda taxes, which have grown in popularity around the country as a way to combat obesity, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. In the past 5 years, San Francisco, Berkeley, Boulder, and Seattle all added soda taxes. Obviously, soda companies don't like it because the more soda costs, the less of it people will buy. So they're pouring, see what I did there? Money into measures that prohibit taxes on groceries and using a pretty broad definition of the term grocery. So, for example, in Washington, the initiative defines groceries as, quote, any raw or processed food or beverage or any ingredient thereof intended for human consumption. And that includes soda. So it was a bit of a Trojan horse. To be fair, labor groups also supported the initiative. They feel taxes on groceries could hurt jobs and small businesses. But there's no denying the big winners were the soda companies. They put a lot of money on Initiative 1634 in Washington. And on Tuesday, they cashed in. That's our show for tonight, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.